So this massive sulfide trend is very well known, is very evident in the field. And also in other sections, you can see just the recrystallized pyrite in what we refer to as hematized ultramafic volcanic. And that's where the gold started showing up. I mean, people laugh at geologists because they say, well, it's a few billion years here or there, but that's true. That's about as good as we could do. There's just no question the higher the percentage of recrystallized pyrite, the higher the gold number.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this live New Break Resources event. I'm pleased to welcome Bill Love, CEO and Director, who will provide a brief presentation following those new to the story. Following his remarks, we'll open the floor to your questions, so you can submit your questions using the chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen. Please note that this event is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch the replay at your convenience afterwards. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Bill.
Well, good afternoon. I first of all apologize for my absence last Monday, and all to say that getting old isn't necessarily graceful. So anyway, I'm back, and so I hope everybody sees the ARC model. That's the Moray land position, and Matachewan is here, which of course is Young-Davidson, which is the Alamos mine, Timmins to the north, and Kirkland Lake just over here. So we're up now over 20,000 hectares, and the company's history with this project goes back. I've had a long history of this project going back probably 2005. I was a shareholder of a company that held the project, and the fellow who ran the company, Dr. Ulrich Kretschmar, was very famous geo, and I did a lot of work. Ulrich worked for me, and I worked with Ulrich anyway. So I had familiarity with the project, from that previous experience. And it's the target was gold. There's a very large cyanite intrusive on Moray, which is known as Facet cyanite. And I was aware of the history of gold veins in the cyanite and gold on the margins of the cyanite. So, I've had a lot of background with this project, and when New Break was looking for gold project when we were starting up, this became available. So, Kyle, do you want to ask me questions, or I should just go ahead?
You can just keep plugging away. We can address some questions at the end. And
now, is everyone seeing the leapfrog model?
Yeah, I'm seeing the transitions just fine. And if people have questions in the chat that are relevant to what's on the screen, I'll pipe up and address them.
All right. So this is our most recent. This is a leapfrog scene, which comes from the the leapfrog and main leapfrog software. And we've now coded in all of the lithologies, the surface lithologies. And I just very quickly want to point out a few things. There's been a history, a long history on Moray, a fair amount of historical drilling, but really very, very few historical gold intercepts. One of which is right here is Noranda 65-1. And this intercept, the logs are redacted, the assays are redacted, but somehow a number of, just over 6 grams, over 3 meters appears in the mineral deposits files. And this intercept was tested by Newmont in 1980 through 80-3, and their assays were also redacted. Now, the significance of this is that there is a fault called the Galler Lake Fault, which is a splay off the main Cadillac Larder Lake break. And for those that are familiar with the western side of the Cadillac Larder Lake break, Young-Davidson is on the Cadillac Larder Lake break, and then there's a controversy as to whether the break runs south down into Southman Township, where Torque Metals, previously Aston Minerals, has the Edelstone project, which is now a gold and nickel resource, or whether it goes north through what's known as the Galler Lake Fault. And this fault runs through the Moray project, coincident with this intersection, and runs up to the south end of the syenite and runs up, we postulated, to where we've had our recent discovery. Let me just take some of this off. Now, this is an assumption regarding the contact of the syenite. Okay. So what we've announced is, quite good gold numbers from hole number 4, which is this one, and hole number 5. And when we did the press release, as you can see, these holes are close to the presumed contact with the syenite. And we first felt, having looked at the syenite mafic volcanic contact in the field, that this may have been, the deposit or the occurrence, the discovery, may be related to a contact metamorphic effect from the syenite. The syenite comes up, it's younger than the mafic volcanics, and you end up with contact mineralization related to the heat of the intrusive. What we have since found, since we have run our second program, is that does not appear to be the case. And what we did before we ran the second program is run, these are mise-à-la-masse contours, and mise-à-la-masse is a way of measuring voltage in rock as a result of a conductive, i.e. sulfide bearing zone. And this line of blue is the Voyager massive sulfide trend, and there's been a long history of companies trying to trace a massive sulfide VMS trend, volcanogenic massive sulfide, to find the core. And what you normally do is at the very margins of a VMS deposit, in what's referred to as the distal, i.e. far away section, you get large amounts of pyrite and pyrrhotite. As you get closer, you end up, usually with a copper stringer zone, which is beneath your lead zinc core of your massive sulfide. So this massive sulfide trend is very well known, is very evident in the field. Many parties, including Newbreak, have stripped it. And what you notice is that there is an abundance of massive, semi-massive pyrite and pyrrhotite, and very minor chalcopyrite. So what that tells you is you're far away from the core of the VMS. And also, when you test this zone for gold, you don't get any gold. And what we noticed is this blue is our Trench 12, which was discovered by SGX Resources in 2012 and consisted of a less than a meter wide sheer breccia vein that had very good gold values. And we had grabs up to 70 grams per ton. And what we noticed is the difference in the texture between the massive sulfide pyrite and pyrrhotite, which just looks like massive pyrite and pyrrhotite, and what appears to be recrystallized pyrite in Trench 12, again discovered on surface. And that recrystallized pyrite appears as fine in many cases, euhedral, full crystals of pyrite, and that's where the gold is. So, SGX Resources discovered it on surface. We expanded, we did more sampling, et cetera, and we found this relatively narrow breccia vein, probably 300 or 400 meters long, kind of north-south, northeast, southwest. So this target, the Trench 12 target, had to be drilled. It was an obvious target. So when we drilled with hole number 4, we noticed, large sections of the core, sections that had the massive pyrite and pyrrhotite. But when you looked at that massive pyrite pyrrhotite, you could see the recrystallized pyrite crystals. And also in other sections, you could see just the recrystallized pyrite in what we refer to as hematized ultramafic volcanic. And that's where the gold started showing up. And then in hole 5, we noticed less of the massive pyrite and pyrrhotite and more of the recrystallized pyrite and pyrrhotite, and more, more classic looking sericite quartz, again, with up to 25% of this recrystallized pyrite. And all of that ran for gold. So when we approached the current program, the natural thing to do is drill what we would refer to in the industry as an undercut, i.e. drill holes below your discovery holes. And we did that with 7 and 8, 7 under 5 and 8 under 4. And we found the top of an ultramafic unit. And this ultramafic unit, when you tilt it, cuts off the mineralization and represents what we're interpreting. It's very flat lying, slightly dipping to the northeast, is a thrust fault. And that thrust fault, we believe, is the structure that is driving the remobilization of pyrite from this massive sulfide unit, the remobilization and recrystallization of that pyrite. And where that's happening is in that whole structural sort of high temperature environment. That's where the gold comes through. So in 7 and 8, we noticed, this ultramafic, again, very flat lying, typified by, fault structures. And we believe that's the structural engine for the shear system that we've now identified. So when we discovered this, we drilled hole number 9 above the ultramafic. We're currently in hole number 10, which is down here, again above the ultramafic. And in both cases, more so in 9 than in 10, we're seeing a lot of this recrystallized pyrite within what we refer to as a hematized ultramafic volcanic. So, what does this mean? It means that we have, the other thing I want to sort of dwell on without getting, too much into geochronology, but the mafic, the VMS system, in Timmins, Kirkland Lake, Matachewan, typically the rock or the stratigraphic denotation is this is Upper Tisdale. So it's probably, the VMS is probably like 2.7 billion years old. And the structural event, this crustal shortening, compression, is likely, 2.64 to 2.66. Now, what does that mean? Well, the interesting thing is the young Davidson syenite has been dated, and it's in about the same date time frame as this, this thrust fault, this crustal shortening. So the question is exactly what is the syenite doing in terms of the system? We're not dealing with a classic, Young-Davidson style cyanide intrusive system where in the Young-Davidson context, you have a structure that's younger than the cyanide. In this case, our mineralized zone and our structure is roughly concurrent with the intrusive. And, we haven't completely figured that out, except to wonder, is the intrusive shaping, the intrusive obviously is brittle, and whereas the mafic volcanics are highly ductile, they can be, they can be reworked. And we suspect that this contact, the cyanide contact, is in fact reworking the contact with the mafic volcanics. Because the other thing we've noticed is there's this, again, very shallow thrust plane, but also we see rolls, and rolls is a very common thing in Timmins, Kirkland Lake, Val-d'Or, Red Lake, structural systems where the stratigraphy will roll over and you get plunging ore chutes. And we've noticed that in this sort of immediate area. And that may be the impact of, again, the intrusive, which date-wise is roughly the same time. I mean, people laugh at geologists because they say, well, it's a few billion years here or there, but that's true. That's about as good as we could do. So, the cyanite's playing a role. It may be in changing the mafic volcanics, very ductile, apt to be moved around. Because we have noticed, and they're known as flats, in mines, because it's very common. I have quite a bit of experience with the Clavos mine, which is, east of Timmins, but any mine, classic mine in Timmins, you'll have these rollovers with flats on the veins, and we're seeing that here. So we're just about finished hole number 10. We're then going to run a hole. These contours are the Mislamass contours, and they represent the density of contours represents the sort of highest conductivity and the, therefore likely the highest sulfide percentage. Now, what we're looking for is not necessarily the highest sulfide percentage, because it's the recrystallization of that sulfide that's key to the gold mineralization. So we're going to run a hole roughly like this, which will be our next hole. Now this hole, this historical hole 80-6, is really interesting because the government in Timmins, in the Government Core Storage Library, the core for 80-6 is present. And I've looked at that core. And at the time that I looked at it with colleagues, we didn't know anything about, the difference between massive sulfides and recrystallized pyrite. But I remember quite distinctly that core exhibits that recrystallization texture. Now the assays were redacted. So, but this hole mirrors the stratigraphy, i.e., well mineralized mafic volcanics down, and then it hits the ultramafic, and the sulfides are gone. So again, when you look at it, there's 80-6. So it hits the ultramafic. Once you're in the ultramafic, the sulfides are gone. So to the northwest, we have a lot of rock that's above this thrust plane contact. And clearly with the mesomass contours, and again, we know from the log from 80-6 that, there's a lot of sulfide present. What we don't know is the degree of recrystallization, and that's the key to the gold mineralization. Again, you can have massive sulfides with no gold, so it's that secondary, younger, shear event that's recrystallizing previously existing massive sulfides that's resulting in gold. Now, to the southeast, the contours you can see, but what we don't know is how much room we have down here above the ultramafic contact, because this is a presumed contact of the cyanide. And, there's no drilling to establish whether that's true or not. So we know to the northwest, there is significant, room on what is a very flat-lying, may in fact be stratabound, meaning like a sheet, a layer of this hematized altered mafic volcanic. But to the southeast, we don't know yet how much room we're going to have. So that's really it, Kyle. And
No, I love this. This is great.
That's the synopsis.
Besides the truth machine, what other methods can you use to find the recrystallized pyrite?
It's really tricky. Anything that you do, whether it's IP or surface EM, it's the large massive sulfide pods are going to mask out any of this much finer recrystallized pyrite. Now, I do know that 80-6, there was a surface exposure of the sulfides. Someone probably well before Newmont did it. Opened the ground, stripped it, and there was exposure. So that's something that we should look at. You should always strip, before drilling, because it's cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that's possible up in here. Well, there's the line right there. So you can strip and the overburden is not that bad. It wasn't bad here. It won't be bad up there.
So you're currently stripping right now there?
No, we're drilling.
Okay.
We're drilling. So you could strip. You should always strip as much as you can because, again, it's the least expensive way to get exposure to to your mineralization and your lithologies. But geophysics wise, we already have IP all over this.
Mm-hmm.
We've got mesomass. And again, these subtle contours just tell you that you've got, a density of sulfides, but don't tell you how much is recrystallized. And, the ultimate way of figuring that out is drilling. But
so
go ahead.
For people watching, what is the scale of what we're looking at right now? What is the scale of this?
Well, we previously, I would refer people to the press release that was done, I think it was November 7th, on the announcement of the resumption of drilling. There's a picture in there, which is in essence this picture. And, there's about 450 meters sort of along this line that needs to be investigated. And they're up here, you don't see it so much. Like, these contours are not, in the actual maps, the JPEGs that the supplier produced, there's a significant amount of sulfide up here, which we don't think anyone's looked at. So, there's the VMS thing here. There's a lot of sulfide up here. But again, it's all about this. Like, if this orange was, a normal vertical fault system, you just see a vertical line because you're looking down.
Right.
But because it's so flat, it appears in a plan view how you're looking down, just to be extremely flat thrust fault. And Peter Habachek, who's Dubrick's QP, has done some really interesting work as to why it's a thrust fault and what it means. That's sort of beyond the scope of this discussion, but he's tied into a lot of research about call it paleo rifting, and he's not the only one. Like, he's tapped into a lot of academic work in the Abitibi, and in the Abitibi being Timmins, Kirkland Lake, Matachewan, Val-d'Or. So there is a reason for it. And we also believe it relates to the Galar Lake Fault, which is that splay off Cadillac Otter Lake, or maybe Cadillac Otter Lake. I mean, that's the problem, is that as you go west from Young Davidson, there's an embayment of Proterozoic sediments that obscures, the Archean rock, so you can't really tell. So we have a lot of scope to the northwest. We're not sure about to the. It's not. Will that ultramafic cut it off completely? Don't think so. But it's a lot. It's very evident to the northwest that there's a lot of rock above this structure, this shear. And the question is, is every single drill hole that's above the ultramafic going to be gold bearing?
Right.
That's probably wishful thinking, but we don't know. In the immediate area of the discovery, we've noticed in 9 and 10 that both holes are well mineralized, 9 more than 10. But it's all about the percentage of the recrystallized pyrite. And there's a linear, I say linear without we haven't done any statistics, but from a observational point of view, there's just no question, the higher the percentage of recrystallized pyrite, the higher the gold number.
Right. Now, when preparing for this interview, there's significant historical drilling on the property from Noranda, Newmont, SGX resources, right, including some holes with redacted assays. How are you incorporating this historical work into your exploration model?
Well,
have you gained?
We have all the historical holes have their their geology types, so that goes in the model. I've already touched on the Noranda hole 65-1. which had redacted assays, but somehow, and I've tried several subsequent residents in Timmins and Crooked Lake, and no one knows why that 6 gram over 6 grams plus over 3 meters plus ended up. But when you look at the log for 65-1, it's a well pyritized, felsic breccia / tooth, which is a really ideal environment for, maybe, Goldridge VMS. So the rock, that target is one that we will test in our winter program. We have an existing permitted pad. It's very easy to find. There was another question you'd asked me in your list of questions about the gradient IP. And there is a target on the eastern side of the syenite where there's quite a bit of historical sulfide. There was a airborne EM conductor, and we want to test and see, do we have a similar interaction as we see here? Mm-hmm. So that's another target. So there's 2 other target areas outside of this, the Zavitz Gold Zone that we will test. Now, in terms of this in terms of this immediate program, 80-06 is, I think, completely relevant because, you can go and look at the core for free. It's sitting in the government core storage library. Mm-hmm. And I know when we looked at it without, in 2022, when we didn't know all this, we tried to resample. It was quartered, and we tried to resample, and the residents said no, for obvious reasons, because once you take away the quarter, there's nothing left.
Right.
So there had been resampling, obviously, to get down to a quarter. But I remember that, and I took a picture of it, which I've showed to the team now, and it looks like recrystallized pyrite. So that particular hole we're focused on now because it's directly relevant to what we're working on.
Speaking of the current drill program, an individual in the chat's wondering, when do you expect to finish this drill program and possibly release results?
Yeah, we expect to finish 10 today. Okay. And then we expect to do one more hole, say 250 meters, another 3 days. So results for the entire program, we're sort of hoping before we break for Christmas. It's about a 3-week turnaround.
For assays?
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I've heard some a lot longer in different parts of Canada right now.
No, Labs in Timmins has been pretty good to us. So, but they're Discovery Silver's, doing a lot of drilling.
Yeah.
So, but we've had 3 weeks consistently in the first program, and even 2 to 3 weeks now in the current program. So, we should be finished, in a week. And, of course, we're getting assays in, from earlier holes that we've already put in. Mm-hmm. But we'll want to put it all out as one, as one disclosure.
Let's talk about what happens if you make an economic discovery here in the end game. Moray is situated at 32 kilometers from Alamos Gold's Young-Davidson mine. It's established mining infrastructure all around. How does this proximity influence your development strategy, and what advantages does this location provide as you advance the project?
Well, we started the company with another project in Timmins, and then didn't find any gold, and we got this project, and projects in Nunavut, and we believe our projects in Nunavut have huge merit, and we now have another junior guardian that's taken them on. But we picked Moray especially because of the proximity to a producer. And what it means economically is that, your economics, if you're not going to put a mill on site, you've got Young Davidson is road kilometers wide because they have kilometer tags on Matachewan Road. So I'm not talking, as a crow flies, I'm talking road kilometers is 45 kilometers, which is inconsequential for trucking. They truck from Kewen trucks from, was it Gray Fox to Stock? That's a long way. So 45 kilometers is really nothing. And even to go up to the Dome Mill, Timmins, we're at 45 kilometers. The Matachewan Road intersects Pine Street South at I think it's 61 kilometers. So, less than 20 kilometers there, and then 50 kilometers to the boundary, the south part of Timmins, and the Dome Mill is right there. So, 75 kilometers again, that's nothing. So, we did this deliberately because of the proximity, not only of Alamos, but, then Goldcorp, now Discovery. Even to go to, go up like the Langmuir Road to go to the Stock Mill a bit further, but not, they can truck, Alamos bought the Golden Arrow, which is outside of Matheson. That's over 100 kilometers, and the resource is like just over a gram, and they could, they think they can make money at that, particularly these gold prices.
Yeah.
So, we're well within allowable trucking distances from multiple mills, and I don't think, we're going to have to develop this out. It's going to take a few rounds of drilling, but the economics are completely different than, having to, be in a isolated area and having to put up your own mill. It's completely different. So that's why we picked the project in the first place.
And why don't you touch about the strengthening of the board and technical team? You have some notable new additions. How did their specific experience shape New Break's approach to advancing Moray?
Yeah, I've known Phil Walford since he was at LAC, kind of early mid 90s, and Phil is incredibly experienced. Because he's saying this morning that he was the senior geo with Pamour and Timmins. He knows Timmins really well, and he grew Valentine Lake significantly in terms of resource ounces. He's just highly, highly knowledgeable. So I know Phil historically, and he's been invaluable on our technical team. Mark Vidosevich, I've met before. He's had a lot of experience in the industry, is very connected in terms of financing. Andrew Thompson, similar thing. Andrew's, is a very useful, as a geologist when it comes to producing copy and pictures. Sometimes he's very useful at, guiding our disclosure, and he's brought significant funding into New Break. So we've really, strengthened the team. We have a really good technical team now. Peter Colbeck, we've announced he's a geo in Timmins that I've known for quite a while. Ron Terrio, I worked with since 2007. Extremely good modeling guy. Peter Abchuk, we worked together for decades. So we have a really good team, Timmins focused, Peters and Timmins. We've got a very good crew of local guys, spotting holes and, Cortex. And so, we're well equipped to undertake and manage, this level of drill program.
Yeah, good crew and good treasury. So what's your 12 to 18 month vision for Moray? What would define success for the project?
Well, the first, as we go along, and this has been pointed out to me by, a number of the guys in the technical team, we need to go from trying to figure out what's going on to a systematic drill grid where we're cutting the structure and stratigraphy, and that leads to resource development. So we're going to get to that point of a more systematic approach on the drilling, I would suspect, in our next round of drilling. So, how long will it take to get to a resource? It's way too early to tell. This is it's not sort of individual veins. It's a vein breccia. So it's, I gotta say it's easier to identify in your core. And, we know from what the discovery holes, you can get quite good widths. So it's something that's, would be easier over time to work towards a resource than trying to trace vein systems that, stop, start, move. This is a bit different. So over the 12-month period, 12 to 18 months, our goal would be to get to a resource. How long is that going to take? It's too early to tell, but that would be the goal.
Excellent. Bill, great presentation. Really enjoyed you walking us through this, and thank you everyone for submitting questions, and we look forward to the next update with you.
Thank you.